Aloha. Welcome to the 40th Annual Hawaii International Film Festival presented by the Hale Kulani and our discussion with Anthony Banua Simon, director of Cane Fire. This is presented as a part of the Film for Thought series in partnership with the Hawaii Council for the Humanities. My name is Christopher Makoto Yogi. I'm a filmmaker born and raised on Oahu, director most recently of the film August at Akiko's, which screened at HIFF in 2018. Taking place in Hawaii, HIFF would like to acknowledge its presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded nation of the Kanaka Maoli. And I'm broadcasting from Los Angeles, the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tongva, Chumash, and Kits people. I have two bits of housekeeping before we begin with Anthony. First of all, for up-to-date information on additions to the program and the full schedule of films, events, HIFF Talk Story Sessions, and Q&A, visit the HIFF website at www.hiff.org. And to participate in the Hawaii News Now Audience Award voting, please head to hawaiinewsnow.com/HIFF to cast your vote for your favorite narrative, documentary, and short film. Mahalo to Hawaii News Now for their support. And now I would like to welcome Anthony Banua Simon, director of the film Cane Fire. I'll do a quick intro on him. Anthony Banua Simon is a documentary filmmaker and editor. His films have screened at venues such as the Brooklyn Museum and MoMA PS1, as well as websites Mubi, Filmmaker Magazine, and Hyperallergic. In 2014, his short about the workers of the Domino Sugar Factory in Brooklyn, New York, Third Shift, won Best Documentary at the Brooklyn Film Festival. Anthony attended the Evergreen State College and was a fellow at the Union Docs Collaborative Studio Program. He is currently a member of the volunteer-run Spectacle Theater in Brooklyn, New York, an amazing theater. So thank you, Anthony, and welcome to HIFF, I guess, virtually.
Thank you, Chris.
I just want to say thank you for making this film, this, I think, very urgent and very fascinating movie. And I quickly want to say congrats on recently being awarded the Best Documentary at the Indie Memphis Film Festival, which is just amazing. I love that festival so much.
Me too, yeah.
And I want to quickly read what I read online, what a jury member said. Carlos Valadares wrote, "Cane Fire is an incendiary look at the entangled histories of Hawaii, Hollywood, the violence of U.S. settler colonialism, and the resilience by indigenous Hawaiians on Kauai. Sprawling yet laser focused. I loved watching this." And I loved watching it too, and I completely agree with the assessment, sprawling yet laser focused. It's an incredible accomplishment of a film, as an essay, a documentary, whatever you want to call it. So I want to first start at the beginning, maybe before the film, if you don't mind. So I would love to hear about your relationship with the island of Kauai. You mentioned in the film that you used to visit there as a kid, visit family there. And so growing up, just like, what was your impression of the island? What are your memories? Any cool things you want to tell us?
Yeah, as a child visiting, it was interesting because I was seeing it from the outside. I grew up on the mainland, and so I would visit occasionally, but it was interesting having the tourist view of through mass media of this place I was visiting. But then when I would arrive, I was giving so much welcome and, from the family, and this whole other story of what it's like to live there, and balancing those two things in my head as a kid. And so I thought, that my cousins would be impressed if I, in my own way, obsessively watched all these Hollywood films, because I was like, oh, it's so exciting because you're seeing the film, you're seeing this big budget production, this is where you live, like, isn't this amazing? And kind of realizing that, it really was not in touch, or it was in opposition to much of their lived experience. So that was kind of a slow education with that. But also as a kid, it was, I was socially awkward. I was an only child that grew up in Washington State. And so it was kind of this thing that I would use to try to impress my cousins, because I couldn't surf. I couldn't, I couldn't keep up, more or less. But those were my earliest memories.
That's awesome. So you were actually watching movies that were shot or took place on Kauai from when you were a young kid.
Yeah, definitely Jurassic Park was like one. I was like, oh wow, this is
Yeah, that's awesome. And so when did you decide to make this film? Like, what was the genesis of the idea to start production on this?
When I did a short documentary in Brooklyn, New York, about the Domino Sugar Factory. It closed down in 2004 in Williamsburg specifically, and it's this huge brick building. It's probably the largest landmark you can see on the Brooklyn waterfront. And it was through a collaborative called Union Docs, where they were making short films in reaction to one particular neighborhood, South Williamsburg, Las Orillas. And I was really interested in the history, and then I started researching, the actual history of sugar production and how it connected to my family, and I knew to some degree, but not as closely as I thought. Oddly, this is a strange connection, but the Domino Sugar Factory, which was like the largest producer of sugar for a while, when my great-great-grandmother, who lived in Puerto Rico, was working in the sugar fields and was actually cultivating sugar that was being sent to Brooklyn to be refined. It was a sugar refinery. And what happened was, after the, Puerto Rico became a territory, the first U.S. installed governor was the president of Domino Sugar. And so already there was a dimension there. And there was this terrible hurricane in 1901 in Puerto Rico that just destroyed many acres of the sugar field. And so workers were out of work in Puerto Rico. And so he actually coordinated, with the rest of the sugar barons in Hawaii to transport workers to come from Puerto Rico to Hawaii. And that's how one of the strands of my family history of how, my great-grandfather from the Philippines, met that side of the family. And so that's kind of where it started. And so I followed the story of now sugar production in Hawaii. My great-grandfather from the Philippines was part of this large labor force coming in to work on the plantations. And that was where it started, starting with my great uncle and his stories of working on the plantations, and then branching out from there. But that's really where it started.
So did you just bring a camera on a trip and just start shooting Henry? Yeah,
really was like the third shift is the Domino Sugar film came together so well in a way that was like, I was a lot more lucky than I thought. I thought that things just kind of come together. So I was like, oh, well, this is, I was energized to keep going and and thinking about this. And I was also thinking about, well, you're seeing this hyper gentrification in Brooklyn, going straight from industrial sugar production, not even to housing, but straight to luxury real estate, because that area of Williamsburg had been rezoned from industrial work straight to residential. And I was watching, meanwhile, what was happening on Hawaii with luxury real estate. And I thought that was an interesting parallel. And so that was the start of it. And so I just grabbed a camera and just spent a lot of time with my great uncle Henry, which he was a great starting point because he had seen so many particular periods in Hawaii's history, and and would point me to people that I could talk to and expand and kind of go from there.
That's really interesting. So it started really almost as like a personal story with implications of labor and industry. And then when did you decide to incorporate the sort of cinematic representation angle into the film?
Yeah, it was something that was kind of in parallel, where I was just seeking out every film as an exercise, every film that was shot in Kauai, and then seeing how it was working in parallel with the actual material history of these significant social movements, and how it commented on them or how it didn't was interesting to me. And I kind of would divide it. I was very influenced by Tom Anderson's Los Angeles Plays Itself, where he's looking at Los Angeles, but he divides it in, Los Angeles as a subject, Los Angeles as a character or a backdrop. Because I think Kauai, I think at first glance you would say, oh, it's just a backdrop for some exotic location. And that's sometimes true, but it's also true that, very powerful forces were making deliberate arguments against working people and the indigenous people through these films. And that's where I got more interested, like, wow, this really concerted effort to put these particular messages into, basically, for business, for imperialism, basically through, the military forces, business forces. And so that's when I got more interested in, well, how do people feel about these films, this kind of back and forth of swapping between these oral histories and how they're being projected or portrayed in mass media.
Yeah, for me, one of the things that's really effective about the film is the way in which you clearly show how the movies were making an argument about capitalism, about Hawaii, about politics, in a way that we can see it so plainly. It's like almost obvious. At the time, it's just a movie, and people don't necessarily think about the ways in which they're being fed certain arguments or storylines or narratives. Mm-hmm. When did you, how many movies did you watch? Do you know?
I watched a lot because I wanted to. I was really drawn to, and in general with large productions, as there's so much control, this budget, everything is tightly wound, but you can't help but have things slip through the cracks just because they're filming something that's real. And I was obsessed with finding those moments of rupture that betrayed what the message that they were trying to control. I thought, well, if I scrub through this, I'm going to miss these small moments. So I had to watch as many as I could. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that the pieces that you pull for your film are pretty convincing and pretty hilarious in some ways, and kind of sad. It's especially that Big Jim McLean. I watched that film too recently. That's a ridiculous film.
Oh yeah, and many more clips that could have been used too. That film has a lot of moments.
Yeah.
That illustrate a lot of things. Yeah.
The other thing that I was really taken by is just the presence of the cocoa palms. You devote a lot of the film to cocoa palms in the way that kind of represents all the different. It's like kind of the convergence of all the different themes that you're exploring throughout the film. It's really interesting, and of course, it shows up in the Elvis movie. But I'm curious, when did that storyline come together? Especially, when did you start filming the activists Keala and Kamu? Because that story, that was a story that I was following just from afar in the news, and I thought it was so incredible. I would love to hear how that story came together. Yeah,
it's funny how in immediate research, cocoa palms, it comes up high on the list for just tourism alone in Hollywood history. But no matter what, even if I tried to move away, it kept bringing me back because, as you say, it's like this overlap of so many things. But even though I knew the history, that it was a sacred place, that there were burials, I was filming before they were going back to that. Keala and Kamu were at the spots. They had been doing that for 2 years, but I was filming before then. And so really I was filming and documenting the tourist side first. And then it was after the fact that I heard about, them reclaiming the land and maintaining it. And I got in contact with Keala, and we had this, very long conversation about we just talked for 2 hours straight when we first met, and just, she was really on board and really about, it was even though she had a very clear goal on the other Native Hawaiians as well as activists, they were willing to entertain, talking about things differently, or in a way that was, maybe a little more abstract for the purposes of the film, but also still respecting what the very clear goals that they wanted to have. And so that was really great. When they were removed by the U.S. Marshals, that was just that I had happened to be there, and just got in the car and texted Keala. It's so different because there had been years of me just filming, these past histories that had happened, but seeing people that are like actively using their knowledge and history to actually, manifest something, and me capturing it, like, something happening before my eyes, was really interesting. And of course it wasn't something I could have anticipated or planned for. It just happened.
Yeah, it's incredible. Not only just their activism, but yeah, that moment when the U.S. Marshals do come, and then there's I think a couple of marshals who basically say we're not about this. Like we're out of here,
mm-hmm.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah,
so it's awesome. I want to also ask about the you deal a lot, like you said. It's interesting that you made that connection between Williamsburg and Kauai. I never thought of it like that, but it's a great connection. How did you get the real estate folks to be involved in the film? Like, did you just say, hey, I'm making a film about Kauai, would you like to speak to me? Or because some of that stuff is incredible. Just what they're saying is ridiculous.
Yeah, that was kind of a strange experience that I had never encountered, because I think that Chad Deal, the real estate agent I talked to, who was on the board of Kauai Realtors, he was a lot more self-aware and self-conscious of like how he came across, and I think he had heard about my film Third Shift before he agreed to the interview. So he kind of read, I think he had an idea of what I was going for. It was almost like he was auditioning for the part, because he's had experience as an actor before, and I think that was really his approach. So he was going in with like, very set rebuttal, an argument, a case, all these things. And so the energy, I think that's where that came from, was kind of a little bit defensive, but also kind of aware, or maybe I assume, of some of the themes I was kind of poking at.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think when you have that voice, but then you also have the voices of your family and of other locals, it makes a really, I think, effective commentary on modern settler colonialism, mm-hmm. And the ways in which the system really has very little regard for folks that live there. Mm-hmm. I would love to hear just your take on what you saw in that regard while you were filming, or what you were thinking as you were filming about all of this stuff. Or was there anything that didn't make it into the film that you cut, or?
Yeah, I mean, in regards to overall what I was thinking, I had a million things swirling through my head, and I did a lot of research beforehand, but it was also always interesting, though, to do research and then talk to someone and be like, well, it's actually not that way. It's this back and forth conversation that is great about documentary. But one thing that was swirling through my head was I had read a book that was called the Autobiography of Protest in Hawaii, I think is the name. And this is a book that was written or collected in the mid-90s. And it's basically an oral history. It just interviews different people in Hawaii in the mid-90s talking about labor and Hawaiian sovereignty, and how the two can overlap with the same goals. And it was kind of, it was exciting, but then also kind of infuriating to read that this was, okay, 96 is, you know, maybe it doesn't feel, it's a long time ago, that these issues that we're talking about now, they're talking about the same things in the mid-90s. You know, it's this kind of response to this free market, you know, the people dealing with the free market and individualistic approach on how to take on the social issues. And so that was like something that that stuck with me. I think that this was something that is, that has been going on for so long. That was something that was stuck in my head, because it was almost like if I had made a documentary about these same ideas in the mid '90s, like this is kind of the things that would be talking about, and like, why are we stuck in this stasis, you know, and thinking about you know, the overlap of, at first I would see my family and, you know, and see that I have a lot of pride behind my great-grandfather, that he was able to organize and he was actually able to, you know, create a better life for himself. But then also having to acknowledge that, you know, this was working within a state logic, a Hawaii state logic of capital, and, you know, there's a different way of looking at it from the sovereignty point of view of relationship to land. I mean, it's all about land, but the way you talk about ownership and all those things, those were something, and you know, those were two things that kind of would be this lingering question in my head of like, how can the two, you know, what's the core of what people want? You know, if you're like cousins my age are going off of the same logic of, you know, what their grandparents did with upward mobility, but now this is something new. We can't do things the way we did before. It has to be a whole new system. And what is that going to be with the limit on the environment? You know, we don't have infinite resources. So yeah, taking from different approaches to, you know, but still having, you know, a self-determination in the end.
Yeah, one thing that the film, I think one argument that's really effective is the way in which, just the way in which labor had more communal power under the plantation system, which is still a system that was obviously really extractive, and you know, there are 5, you know, powerhouses in Hawaii. But now transitioning to the service industry, how actually there's much less, labor has much less power, and you know, and so those interviews with the union, and then going into your great granduncle, great grandfather, and his and then that character of Alfredo, I think his name was, was really incredible. I want to ask about your family real quick. So have they seen the movie? And I'm curious what their reaction to it is, if they have seen it.
Yeah, I would say they have all seen it. It was, unfortunately, I mean, it's clear in the film, my great uncle Henry passed. But I think at first, you know, he passed away in 2016, and I first was thinking about first made a memorial for him. So that was kind of the first introduction to the family of like how I integrated his story, and people liked that. I think that when I showed things a little more, you know, that were a little more sensitive, I didn't know how they would take it, but I respected how they would take it, but they responded to it positively. I think what I was very conscious of is I didn't want to show anyone as a victim. You know, I wanted to show that they are figuring it out in their own ways, and they're not powerless. But I thought that, making it this cohesive piece would be another way of looking at it. So that was, but luckily, yeah, they've been responding well to it.
That's really cool. That's cool to hear. And I'm sure when folks at HIFF watch the film, they'll connect with those characters.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask about the editing and how long you were in post, because it's a pretty remarkable feat what you do, just capturing all these different themes, storylines, topics in a way that I was never confused. I followed the story. You were leading us along in a way that was really remarkable. What was the editing like? How long were you editing?
It was a process where I would kind of film and edit as I went along, and having to rework. And really the only way to make it cohesive was I couldn't have done that on my own, because I was going in so many directions and everything was equally interesting. And I was drawing all these I was really lost in my thoughts and in the footage, as I'm sure people can. And then you put all of this endless stream of Hollywood films to pull from as well. It's like it's so much. But I think definitely the biggest asset, and the only reason the project was able to finish, was my producer, Mike Vass, who he never went to Hawaii with me, but he would, we had similar taste and similar politics. We had collaborated on Third Shift. So we were thinking about the same things, and we really delivered like, this is what we want to do. And so he really kept me on track, where I would come back and show. It was like I was presenting this, I was making my case basically to him, and having to, if I knew something or I was researching something, I had to explain it to him. And then he was able to keep all these threads in his head of like how to keep me on course, which is so hard to do. Like it was really amazing what he did. And it's that, and also we had several rough cut screenings with people we trusted, and it takes a long time. Something that might feel like, oh, it's a natural bridge, might have taken a long time to make these logical connections. I think it's much harder to decontextualize, or especially with Hollywood films, if you extract them and in a particular way, and you have to take them from the original intent and explain it properly, is way harder to do than I had anticipated, because it's so easy to grab clips, but what's going on in your head when you're putting this lot is something you have to. It takes a long time to communicate that to an outside audience. So I couldn't even tell you how long it just was an ongoing thing. It was always part of it.
Yeah, well, it's really effective, and congratulations on it. So this film premiered at Hot Docs, correct? Mm-hmm. Which is one of the premier documentary festivals in the world, in North America. And I just want to quickly ask, like, how was it releasing a film during a pandemic? What's that like?
It's so strange. Mike and I were looking for this catharsis of, I imagined it, I fantasized being in this large room and feeling the energy of the audience all at once. And, they canceled it just about a couple weeks before. So we were all, we had our tickets and everything. And so, it's just released into the world. It was a limited release just to Ontario. And, supposedly, people watched it. I guess what would be a packed movie house worth of people watched it all alone in their own, houses. And it's strange. Yeah. Cause you don't know, you miss that. And it's really too bad. I think that's why I was so excited to go to Indie Memphis, where they had outdoor screenings, just to get that experience. And then I'm yeah, looking forward to more venues like that in the future too, to get that that shared, that communal energy.
Yeah, I certainly miss it. And so this is basically the Hawaii premiere.
Yeah.
Right. What I mean, just what do you hope that folks in Hawaii take away from the film? What do you have any hopes or anything that you're hoping that to communicate or?
Yeah, I think that I hope that I think that I want to give respect to them as like this is a unique history, but also acknowledging that like this is a microcosm of what's happening in the rest of the country right now. But I want to that was more for people outside of Hawaii as I wanted to connect, but for Hawaii I would like them to see that as this kind of connection and this unity, and also respect for how unique their circumstances are. I guess for now, thinking about now, so we're in November and watching it, thinking about how we can be accountable to one another, especially with the circumstance of COVID. In New York, when I was there during the worst of it, it was people had to look out for each other. There was mutual aid networks. There were food banks created by people. It was not the government that stepped in. And when things got better, the governor stepped in and said, "Oh, great, we recovered from this. Now we can go back to things that are normal." But that wasn't because of them. That was, and in Hawaii, I'm really afraid. I'm watching nervously of how there's been this sudden push of tourism, because that is what they're relying on for their industry in a short-term view, and thinking about how can people really demand their respect. And there's so many great programs in Hawaii. I've been watching the Corona Care Hawaii Mutual Aid Network. These are all things that I think people should think about, is how we can look at a future that's actually in reaction to what's happening before our eyes versus the short term. But it's it's hard, especially when you are pushed and struggling and you're thinking about the immediate, what's in front of you, to really step back and think beyond the individual and think more collectively.
Yeah. I like that you shouted out the mutual aid networks, such as Corona Care. I mean, stuff that folks are doing in spite of, everything that seems to be going off the rails. It's always good to recognize those that are doing the good work on the ground. And this is just my final question. What's next for the film, and then what's next for you as a filmmaker?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd like to, we have some more festival dates planned, but what I'm really excited about is like the community screenings. We have a tour of going into different campuses in the US, but I really would like to bring the film to Hawaii and work in that manner as well once it's safe to do so, and in more community screenings, because I like those conversations and I like when they're very focused. For other projects, I have there's some other ideas that have come through my research, but I guess it's hard to plan anything. And thinking more, what I can do to be more, honest about what's happening right now, and what are the priorities of what our country and the world is going through right now. But I hope for good things.
Yeah, it's hard. You're right. It's hard to think beyond a week or something, especially now.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Anthony, for an awesome conversation, and thank you for your film. I want to thank everyone for watching this discussion today, and a special mahalo to HIF sponsors, board of directors, and the HIF Ohana members. If you are able, please consider donating to the HIF40 for 40 fundraising campaign. Every dollar counts toward keeping HIF presenting great content like this in the future. Learn more and donate at HIF.org. And hope everyone has a great week. Thanks, Anthony. Good seeing you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for doing this.